Welcome to the EI Guru podcast, a podcast completely focused on emotional intelligence. Typically, the first question I get is, what is emotional intelligence? In very simple terms, it's how we manage our emotions in our interactions with ourselves and others. Or put another way, it's being in the right state and not being in a state when under pressure. Emotional intelligence is another label for mindset, and we all know that when navigating those important conversations, we need to tap into our best. I'll be interviewing leaders and experts in this ever-expanding field and sharing the data on why emotional intelligence is the difference that makes the difference in all of our relationships. Remember to share and subscribe to the EI Guru podcast, and if you have any questions, you can post them once you've subscribed. Welcome to the latest episode of the EI Guru podcast. And I'm joined, Joe's come back from holiday, and I'm joined and really excited to be discussing the self-management scales today with Joe. And we're going to go into a deeper dive into and have a look into the emotional resilience scale, the personal power scale. And we'll see how far we get, hopefully goal directedness and maybe into the flexibility scale, which is measuring how you are as a human being, how you manage those aspects of your performance as an individual, as a leader, as a parent. And before I get into that, I'm going to just get Joe to maybe just quickly recap what we've covered so far, Joe, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. And yeah, nice to see you again, Jim. This is the third of our webinars certainly that I've been involved with. And certainly the first one, I was just outlining the background to my model of emotional intelligence, the emotional intelligence profile, how it came about in the early days, and essentially how it was organized around a framework, which is really where self-management fits in, the bit we're going to look at today. So as Jim said before, there's two streams. There's managing myself, personal intelligence, and then there's the relationship management, which is the right stream. And there are different levels to it. So we talked about unpeeling layers of the onion from the deepest level of our attitude towards ourselves and others, self-regard, regard for others, which filters up into how we feel about ourselves and our awareness of our feelings and our awareness of other people, which obviously manifests in our thoughts and behaviors in particular. And that's the part we're going to look at today on the left side of the framework, which looks at managing our own behaviors, personal power, goal directedness, adapting to change, and so forth. And the other thing we did, the second module, we did look at a deeper dive into the awareness part, the awareness of our feelings and understanding other people and their thoughts and feelings and how to build relationships with that. And finally, we explored in a bit of detail emotions, how they impact our performance, being aware of our emotions, and another organizing model really around what are the different emotional states and how they impact performance. We call it the emotions wheel, but you've got, the intensity of emotions being strong or weak, and the valence of emotions, which are they more comfortable and pleasant or uncomfortable and unpleasant. And of course, we spend time in all of those zones, and it's learning to be aware of our emotions and how they impact our behavior. And that's why we're moving up this model, because the arrows go from the bottom upwards. And today we're going to be exploring what we call self-management, which is what it says, managing yourself and your behavior pretty much in the present time.
Yeah, and I think that's a really lovely summary, Joe. Thank you for that. And what I find fascinating as a coach working with individuals and teams is when working with an individual when they're not necessarily aware of how to manage their. So let's look at emotional resilience, that scale first off, because that is in its order. That's the one that comes up first in the self-management scales. What I'm fascinated by in that regard is just how some people, if they're operating out of awareness, how they can blame other people about, well, it's not my fault, they make me feel this, and then they knee jerk to a response. So it's the sort of the red mist. It's a bit like the football player or the rugby player or the an athlete sees red mist and all their potential, their ability to, show up and perform at a high level, all of a sudden just leaves them, deserts them. It's sort of like, yeah, I just can't perform at that level now. I just can't find that groove that I was able to effortlessly find before. Now I've seen the red mist. I'm not tapping into my potential. So I find that funny. And when I say funny, I find it interesting because, of course, people, leaders also exhibit the same similar sort of behaviors where they see the red mist and they have what I call a hissy fit. So a hissy fit is where they have a rant and a rave either at someone or with a team, and it's quite remarkable. So this week I'm really excited about going into the emotional resilience scale, and in particular it's probably one of my favorite self-management scales, along with a couple of the others, to be fair. Actually, emotional resilience, personal power, and goal directedness are my three favorites. I get really excited about unpacking those when I'm working with clients, purely because they have such a huge impact on how we manage ourselves. And of course, flexibility and the others do come into play for sure, but these ones are the big hitters. And when I say the big hitters, in particular, when it's linked to someone that's got a low self-regard. So if they've got a low self-regard, those three scales tend to, the others also obviously are affected, but the emotional resilience, the personal power, and the goal directedness, they are the ones that really do get hit quite in a big way.
Yeah. And as you know, Jim, we ordered these scales deliberately how they statistically correlate with self-regard. So unsurprisingly, emotional resilience is the most very closely related to self-regard, although they are, of course, different. So emotional resilience is how well we bounce back from adversity. And you could be very good at bouncing back from adversity and dealing with setbacks, responding effectively, but underneath you may not still feel great about yourself. And
Yes.
even some people are very strong self-regard, self-sense of okayness, but they still struggle with dealing with setbacks. So, they can be different scores.
Mm. Yeah, no,
But all of these scales are closely related, and same with personal power, which you might say is more to do with self-confidence. It's about your belief in your capability. But just because you feel you're capable and able doesn't mean you feel like you're a worthwhile human being. I think I've used the example before. You may think, yeah, I'm brilliant at football, I'm brilliant at maths or music, but underneath, I don't feel like, I feel like this imposter syndrome. I feel
yeah.
like I come across as brilliant. I'm very high on self-management, but deep down, I've got concerns, particularly, in certain situations. And often those deeper driving self-doubts are the thing that drive us on to almost prove ourselves, show the rest of the world that I am good enough, or to show to myself. So you often find the top people in industry or PhDs or whatever it is they've excelled in are unconsciously driven to prove themselves. And it doesn't mean that everyone successful is necessarily deep down riddled with insecurities, but it can be a very strong motivator. But unfortunately, you notice it doesn't necessarily deal with the underlying anxieties that a person have, basically feeding the insatiable fears that they may have.
Yeah, it is interesting, and especially if we sneak back to self-regard, it's fascinating. So self-regard, someone can have a low self-regard and still function as you've just really described. They still can function and be successful. It just means that they're just not particularly happy with themselves. They're not comfortable in their skin.
Yes, and actually, I think the difficulty there is it makes the person less flexible, which is another scale of self-management. We
Yes.
become more rigid, so we're constantly, say, striving or driven to do something in our way, and that can take you so far, but it might impact other aspects of your life, say in your relationships outside of work, or even the motivation or do you get the best out of other people? So relationship management's quite likely to suffer if you're driven by that low self-regard, and it creates a sort of rigid way of behaving that undermines all sorts of other behaviors and performance in what you do as a leader, particularly.
Yeah, no, I can certainly see with hindsight very clearly now, before I really got into emotional intelligence myself as a coach, as a human being, that I know I have developed my relationship management scales. I know that my self-regard has grown over the years, and I know what was masking me growing my self-regard was the goal-directedness, my emotional resilience, my personal power. Those scales were certainly masking me having to do anything with my self-regard and think about it, because they helped me be successful in whatever it was that I was doing.
I think that's a good term, Jim, is masking, because sometimes we're so effective at the top layer of the framework, are managing our behavior, that we can disguise it, not just to others, but even to ourselves. Think, well, everything's, and eventually, of course, there's a catastrophic tipping point where there's sort of this, I just can't keep going on like this and like pretending. I mean, we're not saying you should, get rid of all those brilliant skills and capabilities and outcomes you've achieved, but they aren't all. And to be honest, developing many of these skills will help. Developing emotional resilience and goal directors will help you build your self-regard.
Yeah.
But often it's if you've excelled in those, and maybe it's a different scale, different aspect of emotional intelligence that you need to work on. Maybe it's more on the relationship side, like building connections
Yeah.
which meet the underlying needs that aren't being met as a human being. So the need for intimacy, connection, a sense of meaning and purpose in your life. It's generally something quite fundamental that's not yet being met. And you need to look through the profile to help you identify which aspects of EI were going to help you most.
It's really interesting that you talk about the purpose, etc. I'm doing a speech at my aunt's funeral next week,
Mm,
and I start my speech with Mark Twain's quote, which is, the two most important days in your life are the day that you're born, and then the day that you find out why. And I talk about my aunt, and talk about, I don't think she ever really thought about her why
mm,
necessarily, because actually she was just naturally phenomenal as a mother and
mm,
as a wife. So she radiated unconditional love. And
mm,
so
mm,
she didn't really necessarily think about that. But I think it's interesting that you talk about purpose there, Joe, because so many people don't necessarily consider, well, what is it I'm here to do? Or what is my legacy? And which is a bigger, deeper, which links back to the self-regard piece. So it's a really great question is, okay, so why did I show up on planet Earth? What is this?
mm,
What am I meant to be doing here?
mm.
And
Which
ultimate,
brings to
go on.
Sorry, Jim. It just brings to mind two elements of emotional intelligence. One is goal directedness, which is understanding what is it you really want, and not to confuse goal directedness with this sense of driving and continually striving for more, which is what many competencies models. It's about, you may really want just to take life easy or retire, or you may really want to look after other people and be caring,
Yeah.
um, like your aunt, or you may not want to be, the high achiever. Well, it's knowing what you want. But the other aspect is that comes to mind when you describe your aunt, actually, is authenticity and that congruity between yourself. You don't necessarily need to cognitively know that I've got these values and this purpose all written down, I live by them. You just know it when you're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could live your entire life just feeling fulfilled, satisfied, and feel in tune and in the flow, if you like, with who you are.
Yeah.
And you may not know exactly what's going on, but you know you're doing it. Yeah,
And she was a great example of that,
yeah,
a
yeah,
fantastic example of that.
mm,
So let's get into the self-management scales, and in
yeah,
particular
yeah,
the one that kicks off the whole self-management scales. Those six self-management scales is emotional resilience, and
mm,
I find emotional resilience it's almost like a superpower
mhm,
that people have. If they've got high emotional resilience, they're able to, it's almost like they've got a Harry Potter invisibility cloak that is bulletproof, that stops any of the bullets and any of the things that can potentially dent other people, and it doesn't seem to get through their cloak, their bulletproof vest. And it is like a superpower, because it does help them, as the scale suggests, that it's your ability to bounce back when things go wrong, and how you handle that. So the image that comes straight flooding into my head is the image of a headless chicken. So someone that's got a low emotional resilience will run around and and not be able to handle themselves. Now, as a leader, that's not particularly great. That's not exhibiting what good looks like. when you're under pressure. And interestingly, of course, what we're talking about is being able to handle your emotional resilience when things are going well is relatively easy. What we're interested in, of course, is when shit happens and curveballs get thrown, how do you handle yourself under pressure? And so emotional resilience is for certain, for me, one of my favorite scales. So
Yeah.
let me hear your perspective, Joe, because you've got a lot to say about emotional resilience, and I know we've got some shared experience around our own personal athletic stuff that we've done, and we can maybe talk a little bit about that. But I'm just interested from a psychological perspective and the scales perspective.
Yeah. Well, as you say, Jim, it's definitely your ability, your capacity to bounce back from adversity. I think we should be cautious as well, not to say just gritting your teeth, the sort of mental toughness, old-fashioned approach, which is it's not sustainable. It can carry you through difficult times, but you need to balance that with self-awareness. Say, what's causing this setback? Why am I responding, finding this so difficult? I've got through it, but the amount of cortisol and stress in your body's got to go somewhere. So you may need to go back a little bit further and say, where's it coming from? Which is the self-regard, which is the self-awareness piece, rather than this sort of macho, be strong mindset. Don't let feelings out. And maybe for some people, it's about learning to let them out a bit sooner, learning to share your concerns, connecting with others that might help you. So I think there's a balance to be struck with resilience. Just checking in with yourself, you're not kind of overdoing it. Just a point here, we do say that with all these scales, these aspects of emotional intelligence, you can't have too much. So this is your capacity to deal with setbacks. If you find you are just being strong and holding it all in, then it's not a lack of it's not too much emotional resilience you've got. It's a lack of maybe emotional expression and control, which is another
Yeah.
aspect. Yeah, learning to release it and talk about it, or flexibility. So the other scales will help build emotional resilience. We've broken down emotional resilience into different stages. And in fact, I created a different report for emotional resilience where the 16 aspects of EI build on it. And there are 4 parts to that. We call it the Thrive model. I
Yep.
say we, it's a Talogy product, but I was the creator of the Thrive framework. And the first stage is a survival response, which really taps into the fight and flight response. So when, as you say, shit hits the fan and things go badly, hit adversity, some people will catastrophize. Oh, it's all me. There's low self-regard, and it comes from the underlying self-concept of, am I okay? Is everyone else out there safe or a threat?
Yes.
And often that's a big drop off from everything going well to hopeless. The next stage is coping with that, and just rather than letting it continue to go worse and worse, just adapting and adjusting. So the adapting phase. And this requires more of the middle layer, which is awareness. Say, oh, hold on a minute, how am I feeling? Just slow down a little bit. How is this impacting on other people? And you can start coping, and it sort of flatlines. You don't want to stay there, but it's a good adjustment time. If you like, on our feelings framework, it's about they're uncomfortable feelings, but they're useful ones just to get in touch with. You don't want to skip that stage,
Yeah.
otherwise you won't deal with it. But you do need to move out of it. And Martin Seligman, who's a father of positive psychology and emotional resilience and so forth, he said there are 3 types of people: those who get stuck there and in a state of resigned helplessness. There's not
Yes.
much I can do, I give up. And there are those who bounce back. About a third of people seem to get back to where they were before, what we call the recover stage. And this part is very much about self-management skills like personal power, goal directness, emotional resilience, the things you were talking about, being tough. And you've got to draw on those strengths to get out of that trough. But the third he was really interested in were those who don't just bounce back to where they were, but they become stronger. So
Yes.
we always say that, setbacks are useful if you learn from them. And this is the difference between the most emotionally intelligent people, the third of people that tend to go and thrive. Okay. And these are different aspects, and they're hidden amongst the profile. For example, reflective learning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you stop and say, well, that was a tough, roller coaster ride. What have I learned from that? How's it impacted me? What will I do differently? How am I going to change? So all the things you do in coaching would be helping people get through there. And then next time adversity hits, they don't have this catastrophic drop, or it doesn't last as long before they manage to get back out of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, when we think about emotional resilience, I very much consider it in those 4 elements. We call that the Thrive model. In fact, I
Yeah.
did there's a blog out recently I did on that. So on
Okay, well,
HR resource.
I'll definitely put a link on this video clip for that resource, because that would be
Mm,
useful for our listeners to be able
mm,
to get a link and have a read of that. That would be fantastic. And
mm.
you're right, Martin talked about, in his book, I think it was Learned Optimism.
Yeah,
What a great book.
yeah,
And
yeah.
great supportive data around bouncing back, but actually learning from it. And you're right, in the coaching piece, that's one of the main reasons I talk about inviting leaders to keep a journal, because
Mm,
that's
mm,
a great way of learning
mm, mm,
from their experiences, because that's the only way to. Someone said recently in one of the recent interviews was that there's only failure if you don't learn. So I think
mm,
that's
mm,
very true. We don't talk about failure as such, we talk about learning. And
mm, mm.
that's exactly what he talks about.
Yeah, which takes us back to a sort of attitude level of mindset, because underneath it does come back to your perception of how you want to live your life, who you are, and have the fundamental, intention of where you want to go with it. So, yeah, I mean, maybe we're going to talk about development ideas around emotional resilience now. Jim, I
Yeah,
don't
that
know
would
if
be
you want
great if you
to.
can maybe share some of your thoughts around. Okay, so
Mm,
someone, if they've not particularly scored well on their emotional resilience, and you see it's actually it's energetically they show up a certain way,
mm,
these individuals. There's
mm,
an energy about them that they're not at ease with themselves, and I think
mm,
that so strongly, as you said, links to their self-regard. So they're not comfortable in their skin
mm.
normally, and they're just at dis-ease, so they're not happy and not comfortable. So what would be some of the things that you would recommend, suggest people look
Yeah, I'd
at?
definitely go back to that. Find yourself. Go back to your intentions, your authenticity side. I think, practically speaking, just before we started, I think Jim, you went off to get a drink, and there were sort of special things that work for you. But
Legal,
what the
but
point?
legal stuff, legal
No, of
bits.
course, but it's about looking after your body physically. If you're tired, you haven't eaten properly, and all the things we take for granted. But it's such a massive component to mental health and coping. I notice when I start getting croaky and I've not drunk enough water, generally it's a bit tired, but I haven't drank enough, and I just feel a little bit more grouchy and irritable. And I filter things through a more negative lens, and then it's everything's like a little bit more annoying. So if I can look after my body, it's like looking after the workforce. It will look after you.
Yeah,
Um,
so you won't become hangry, as they say.
yeah, it is that. I mean, it sounds simple, but I think some of the simplest methods are what we don't pay attention to, and then we go and see a doctor, then we take antidepressants, and before you know it, you're on a vicious spiral of depending on somebody else and something else, and we've lost
Yes.
personal power, lost sense of self empowerment, which makes things even worse. So start with yourself, do these simple things, get good sleep, don't drink too much coffee, so on and so forth. Things, doesn't mean you can't enjoy yourself. The other thing that might be useful is going back to, we talked about this feelings construct and the wheel,
Yes.
and we talked about 4 different areas of zones, if you like. And the one for me that would really help with emotional resilience is what we call the renewal zone. This
Yes.
is where you have positive feelings, but they're not intense. It's not like enthusiastic, excitable and stuff. It's more reflective, calm, slowing down. And you might acquire that through breathing activities or reflection. Basically just slowing down and trying to recall more positive experiences in your life, or just noticing your own body at the present time. That renewal zone is the recovery place. And you'll definitely need to go there if you're looking at bouncing back from adversity.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting how you were saying it so strongly links to self-regard, and it sort of makes me think about situations that I've been in personally when I'm been racing. Certainly things like an Ironman
Mm,
or the race across America, which is more extreme. And I tap into my emotional resilience in those races, of course. And the thing that is very obvious to me is when someone doubts that I'm not going to be able to do something or achieve the goal, that's when my emotional resilience comes to the fore. It's sort of like, okay, I'll show you. It's sort of like,
mm,
how
mm.
how dare you even doubt that I'm going to
Yeah,
do this? it's my self-regard sort of
Yeah,
creeping up and saying, I can't believe you've
yeah,
just said that you believe I'm not going to
yeah,
do it. So
yeah.
it's a bit like, if you want to poke the bear, then that's the thing to do, is say, yeah, I bet you can't do that, I bet you won't be able to achieve that.
I think it's very individual, isn't it? I often think of a seesaw, and you've got certain resources, and you know yours very well because you've been through an awful lot, certainly on the bike and other things you've done, is knowing what works for you. And the
Yes,
more you tap into those resources, and the other side you've got stressors, and one side you've got resources. If you've got more of these, you know how to use them, which is the other point. Is you know how to use it and galvanize yourself. That will be help you to sort of cope better. The other way of doing it, of course, is get rid of the stressors. So remove the things that are causing you a problem. Maybe people nagging you or giving you a hard time, but move
yes,
away from them at times or find positive people. So you can change both ends of the scale. But the bit I really like as a from a psychological perspective, not just changing the improving the resources and getting rid of the problems or reducing them, is changing the pivot point. Because you only have to move a centimeter one way perhaps, and it has a massive leverage effect.
yes,
And this pivot point is your perception of events. That's your perception of events. So if you change your perception of stressors, reframe them, look at them differently, accept that there's certain setbacks you're going to face in life and you've dealt with them really well in the past, those types of things, suddenly your pivot point moves the other direction. And those stresses become much more minimalized because your point is having less effect on them. And also it builds up your resources. You say,
yes,
I'll show them. You draw on your stuff. That's what's going on in your head. This is the bit you can control. You can actually move your perception of yourself, of the environment you're in, of other people. And that makes perhaps much bigger difference than actually spending an awful lot of time trying to create strengths or change the world that you don't like. Yeah? So I find that good metaphor, really, when you're thinking about emotional resilience.
yeah. No, I like the seesaw, and actually, you've just reminded me of the one of the models we talk about in the coaching world is the E+R=O
Mm,
model that you're familiar with as well, Joe, which is the E stands for the experience, or the curveball that gets thrown,
hmm
the plus the R, which is our response to that experience,
mm, mm,
equals an outcome. So E+R=O. Now, most people would say, so we're pretty familiar with the experiences. Most of those we can't control. In fact, they happen. The weather happens, traffic happens, rude people happen, etc. There's a whole load of stuff that's on the list, IT problems, etc. So that's something that's out of our control. But what is in our full control, and a lot of people don't necessarily always give credit to this, is that we have full control of ourselves, of how we respond to those experiences. And this is where we can start talking about the next scale, which is the personal power scale, which is people don't take personal responsibility. So they would prefer to, instead of saying, oh well, it's not my fault the way I respond, it's because they make me feel a certain way. Well, actually, your feelings, you're in control of those, not somebody else, or somebody else shouldn't be in control of those feelings, is the point. So it's about managing your response. So the E+R=O framework is so clever because world-class athletes, they know that the experiences are going to happen, so they don't even consider that. What they are aware of is how they respond to those situations. So if they get interviewed, you'll see they'll talk about, the interviewer will be saying, what about, Joe, he's your main competitor, what do you think about him? And you say, well, I can't really do much about Joe
mm,
because that's Joe's responsibility. Joe's in control of Joe. I'm taking, I'm focusing on me and my performance. So
mm, mm,
so it's about taking full responsibility for you and how you respond. So the model is very cleverly manipulated. So they accept that the experience is going to happen. And before they respond, they go straight to what their desired outcome is. So what's
mm,
the
mm,
outcome
mm,
that I want in this situation? This has just happened. This curveball's just been thrown. How do I want, what does the outcome look like? What's a good outcome look like for me? And then they respond appropriately based on their desired outcome. And then they've got a better chance of getting the desired outcome.
As you say, it takes us into the next two scales almost. You've got personal power of, you know, what degree do I believe I have choice in my circumstances and what I do about it? And interestingly, you say you can control, theoretically, we don't know the truth, but is it useful to assume that maybe you can control your pivot point? You can control your thoughts, your feelings, your attitude, change what's going on for you. Questionable. Can you change your circumstances and environment? We'll talk about that. But outcomes, where you want to go, is very much about what we call goal directedness.
Yes.
Do you clearly know where you want to go? Because if you don't, you might end up somewhere else, as someone else once said.
Yeah. So with that E plus R equals O model, I when I'm working with groups, teams, you can do a list. You can get them to articulate what are the lists of the things that are the things that burst your bubble. So you've got this bubble and you're having a great day and you're on a roll. What are the things that take you from being a 10, on a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of how you're feeling and your state, feeling great, and what are the things that have got the potential to burst your balloon and take you, spiraling down to a 1 or even into the minus figures. So they list a whole load of things, and that list is basically a predictor list of all the things that could potentially derail them from having a great day to turning into a nightmare of a day. And then once they are aware that actually these things are going to happen all the time, so curveballs they're constant, they're not going away. We spoke about VUCA previously, Joe. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and an ambiguous environment. So VUCA is, being spoken about for the last 10, 15 years at least in the leadership world, around the environment that leaders are having to operate in. Now, VUCA is, the latest VUCA for all of us was COVID. Before that, in the UK, it was Brexit. We were running around like, thinking Brexit's going to mangle everyone here in the UK. When COVID came along, Brexit just got dropped. It was sort of like not even a thing.
Yeah.
COVID became the thing. So COVID became the VUCA. Now COVID's settled down a little bit. There will be other curveballs. There will be other situations, other VUCA moments that leaders will have to navigate. One of them is actually the fallout from COVID itself. Attempting to get people back into the office now is a little bit of a struggle for organizations. So that it's just interesting to see how people handle that adversity.
I think it's a good example, Jim, of how the brain works in terms of our attention is drawn to whatever's, well, pretty much newsworthy or high arousal events. Oh, there's been a catastrophe in China or over here. And then suddenly that's the only thing going on in the world or in our world. And we move very quickly from catastrophe to catastrophe. And learning to step back, have perspective, easier said than done, because we do live in a social media world and we're all very connected now. And actually just look at what's going on for you right now. Do you presently have COVID, or is Brexit currently affecting you in what ways? But actually, your health is good. Maybe your relationships are okay. You're earning a living, or whatever it is you're doing. Focus on the things that are giving you the resource to cope with difficulties. And a lot of those difficulties are in newspapers or on media. They're not actually happening to you right now. Empathy, understanding, sympathy is a valuable attribute as well, but try not to get too sucked into too many difficulties and setbacks, because you've probably got enough of your own which are real to deal with as well.
No, very true. So true. I mean, I skim the papers, and in fact, recently one of my mates said, did you hear about the airline thing? And I genuinely did not know about. There was a meltdown a couple of weeks ago where everyone was stranded in various parts of Europe, and it was the air traffic control thing, I think, went bust. And I didn't have a Scooby that was happening. I didn't know anything about that until they said, "Oh, have you heard of?" And they laughed about it, and I said, "Well, I'm hearing about it now." So I'm now up to date because you're bringing me up to date with that information. I don't need to read a newspaper to tell me that there's doom and gloom around the world. It's been happening ever since time began.
So this is, this draws into personal power very well, really, which is the degree to which you feel responsible for yourself. your
Yes.
circumstances and what you create in terms of the behaviors and actions you take, versus say being a victim of circumstances. You say, I can't help it, it's not my fault, other people to blame. Yeah, what we've been talking about really is around personal power, that facet of emotional intelligence, which is the degree to which you feel responsible for yourself, for your own behavior, and to a large extent what happens in your life, taking it to the further extent, versus do you believe you're a victim? And the examples you gave were, I can't help it, my life's very difficult, other people have got it in for me. A lot of sort of blaming, if you like. One way of looking at it is there are different levels of responsibility or even choice in how you choose to live your life. You might say at the very least level, it's about, well, it's in the lap of the gods, it's fate, or it's down to my genetic makeup. I'm a personality type and I'm always going to be this way. Or other people are to blame, like my parents or my boss or the government. It's just always externalizing it rather than
Yes.
having an internal sense of locus of control. I think a level beyond that is very much saying, yes, as you said, Jim, in your model of, I can choose my response to events. I can choose how I deal with this. I can choose my thoughts, my feelings. I think a very good example of that was, and if you think you can't, read this book by Viktor Frankl,
Yes.
which is called Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
So
Powerful.
you've read it. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
he was in a concentration camp and he says they took away every freedom you could imagine. Of course, we know this, but they couldn't take away his beliefs. They couldn't take away his attitude of himself. He couldn't stop him being kind to others, even though it's very difficult. There were people in that concentration camp giving their last piece of bread to their closest friend. So these are examples, a very extreme example that maybe we do have a bit more choice than you think you do sometimes. So, but there is a level beyond that, not just talking about myself choice, but can I create the circumstances I want in my life? So, well, of course you can't. I mean, there's an element of acceptance. I agree with that. But also, would it be useful to try it out and consider maybe I co-created this situation I'm in? So rather than saying, it's nothing I can do about it, and talking about the emotional resilience cycle and the thrive cycle, those who believe they've got personal power, that they can change events, change their circumstances, tend to be happier and perform better. Not saying you have to blame yourself. That's a choice in itself. You could say
Yeah.
beating yourself up. Well, you could choose not to beat yourself up and say, try it out. Maybe there's a little bit more influence I have over my friendships. That the idea that if you're positive, maybe other people around you are going to be more positive. And I talked about emotions last time. As a leader, what climate do you create around you? How do people feel working for you? It's something to do with your behavior and your relationships and what you do that may impact on that. So I personally like trying out that view that you don't just create your response, you can create your environment to a large extent as well. And I would say that's an invitation really to have an experiment. Don't beat yourself up if it doesn't work out, but you can if you want, but I wouldn't do that. But have a go. Start with the assumption maybe I have more choice than I think I do,
Yeah.
and
I
see
love
how it
that.
goes. Yeah.
I love that thought of try and experiment, because actually that
Mm,
was a great phrase that I picked up some years ago, was
mm,
life is an experiment. So,
mm,
the more experienced if you want to get experience
mm,
or experiences, you need to have more experiences in life to be able to become experienced. So go and treat life as an experience, try out those different ways of thinking. And, neuroscience is caught up, thank goodness. And it's showing us that, yes, you can, so for example, with illness, with disease, neuroscience is caught up and they've researched this now. And a lot of people would have previously put diseases down to genetics predominantly. They would have thought it's all genetics. And many years ago, it was proven that actually only 4% of disease is genetics based. The rest is epigenetics, which, as you know, is the environment, the environment that we grow up in, the thinking that we do, the food that we eat, the exercise that we have, etc. All these things are so well captured in data from studies that have been done around the world that show that epigenetics is the bit that makes the difference.
So that's the idea that the way you live your life may switch on certain genes and switch off certain genes. So they're still there, but some become more triggered, if you like.
Yes.
And you could even pass that on as to your children to turn them on or turn them off, depending on what you do. So living more healthily might create more positive genetic, influence on your child.
Yeah, 100%. And going back to your levels of personal responsibility, I think right at the very top is taking full personal responsibility for everything in your life. So I run me, so everyone that I interact with, I'm the key denominator in all of those relationships. So I've got to take personal responsibility for how those relationships are, and whether they're healthy or not healthy. So I've got to take personal responsibility. Of course, there's another side to those relationships, the other person or the other people. But if I don't take personal responsibility, I lose an opportunity to grow, is the way I've always looked at it, Joe. I've always thought, okay, I've got to take personal responsibility for my end and dig in there and make sure I exhaust to my greatest ability the role that I played in this. I can't change that individual. What I can do is change me. And I take personal responsibility for that piece. And so that's about, I think that's at the higher level personal responsibility.
Absolutely. You say you can take 100% responsibility for everything that happens in your life. I mean, that is going somewhere. So you could say it's very empowering. Yeah. So people who do that often feel, or go further with that, so they feel more control of their lives. Yeah. But it's also quite a difficult thing, because you say, well, what did I do that contributed to this incident happening? Yeah. So, I mean, take a ridiculous example, but if I go out in my car and somebody drives into the back of me when I'm just doing nothing particularly, so, well, it's nothing to do with me. I wasn't even, driving the car at the time. They smashed into me. But, well, you could say, well, you chose to go out. You chose to drive your car. If you'd really wanted to play it ultra safe, you'd not drive your car or keep you looking in the mirrors all the time. But we choose not to maybe take that level of cautiousness, because life would be very, very difficult if we did. So we're accepting. So to some extent, I'm accepting a certain amount of risk in my life.
Yeah.
Because I want to spend my time differently. But it's coming back to the point of, if you start accepting that everything is your choice, that maybe you've done something. If you haven't been there, would it have happened? No. Okay. So you are in a way co-account. And again, I go back to the point, it's not about blaming yourself or finding fault. It's just recognizing, did you have some influence over this situation, over your personal relationship going wrong, over your work situation, over something awful, particularly when things go badly, we suddenly get into the blame game. And what you notice after you've done a lot of blaming is you might feel a bit better temporarily, but nothing's changed.
No.
Nothing changes. If you want to change it, then you change that pivot point, your perspective.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you talk about that, because Leadership and Self-Deception, the book that I've spoken about previously as well, which is the book that describes beautifully Albert Semmelweis, the obstetrician who was working as a professor in Austria back in the late 1800s. The book, that's the story that the book starts with, which is his awareness. They had the highest mortality rates in Austria, in all the Austrian hospitals. And he was looking at everyone else and trying to work out what was happening in his hospital that other people were involved in. What were they doing that was causing this high mortality rate? And it wasn't until he went on holiday and had 2 weeks away from the hospital that the mortality rates dropped. And then he had to forced him to have to look at himself and say, okay, so this has got something to do with me. So what was he doing that was creating this high mortality rate within his hospital? And the thing that he was doing was all the stuff in the mortuary. So he was doing a lot of the investigating the cause of death, etc. But he wasn't washing his hands, or wasn't washing them properly, and then going and operating on live people, which was then causing illness and disease in those live patients. So, and it wasn't until he got that awareness that he had to look in the mirror and look at himself and say, okay, so what is it that I'm doing? So that speaks beautifully to the personal responsibility piece, Joe, in leadership. in leadership
Yeah,
in
and
particular.
yeah, and as soon as you start adopting that view or trying it out, as they say, is maybe what did I do that created this? You start asking that question, and then you
Yes.
start finding, oh man, but in that example, you found sort of life-changing situations. But as
Yeah,
a leader, you might find actually maybe if I just said good morning to people, it's not often what you do, it's what you don't do, of course, as well.
of course.
Or showed a bit more attention, or changed my style a bit, or whatever. It says maybe that would get a better response from this person. Or
Yeah,
maybe I
no.
should, and maybe I just need to be more assertive and tell them where they're going wrong or something. But you could do something, perhaps.
Yeah, you're right. It's either what are they doing or not doing that's
Mm,
created this
mm,
behavior in this
mm,
individual. So that's where an exceptional leader will go there first. They will ask
mm,
themselves the question,
mm, mm,
okay, so I haven't got this relationship is a bit off. What am I doing or not doing that's creating this?
mm,
You
mm,
know, what am I
mm.
doing to create this pattern of behavior in this
Mm.
relationship?
Yeah. And I like the idea of co-creation as well. So they
Yes.
could do the same. Maybe over time they could work towards that place as well.
Yeah.
Um, but it's, I do believe that we influence our environment by our own behavior. And you talked about neuroscience and the idea of mirror neurons, oscillator neurons, and that we get into harmony with other people very much by changing our, and sometimes I'd say it's not what you do, it's how you feel. So if I feel energized, it will leak out in every mannerism and tone of voice and color of my skin, and whatever I'm doing
Yeah.
will influence other people, just because I've got a sense of a positive engagement or positive feeling. Other people start building on that, quite possibly.
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. We spoke about smiling the other week, and you know that chemical cascade, and it
Mm,
happens in
mm,
every.
mm,
So every thought that we have creates a chemical cascade. So when we do smiling, you know that triggers off the oxytocin and serotonin and the dopamine, the beautiful drugs that are
mm,
great for us. And the same applies to someone that comes on energetic.
mm,
That energy transfers.
mm.
So it's no wonder that birds of the feather flock together.
Yeah.
So personal power is another what I class as a superpower, and I it's really not trying to disrespect the other aspects of emotional
Mm,
intelligence, but
mm, mm,
the emotional resilience, being able to handle yourself under pressure. So a leader that is able to do that and just is calm, there is such a difference when they walk into a room, into a situation that is, you know, all going off. How they hold themselves is massively impressive. And a lot of that is down to then their ability to take personal responsibility. So they pretty much own it. They say, okay, I'm the leader and I'll handle this. You know, they take control and they take personal responsibility and show
and
up.
and you tend to notice that individuals with high personal power are not those who necessarily seek to be in charge, but people gravitate towards them because people can sense that they have a sense of direction. They have a sense of you can believe in them,
Mm.
and having somebody you believe in, because they believe in themselves, of course, is the mark of leadership. So yeah, it's a big factor when it comes to getting the best out of other people.
So, is there anything other than, I mean, I spoke about the E plus R equals O model, which links to emotional resilience, but also links to personal power. Is there anything else, Joe, that you want to add to how do you develop these things apart from, you know, the awareness piece you were talking about earlier, which is really important to be able to be aware of the renewal things that, so if you are emotionally low, you know, and you can feel that you're not particularly in a great space, what are the things you can do to get yourself back up there? You know, so go for a walk, take a breath, you know, all those things,
Mm,
you know, eat
mm,
well, sleep
mm.
well, you know. So what are the renewal things that you can do at work that would be useful?
To build personal power. I think draw upon your previous experience. Draw upon times when you felt that way. It's very much a feeling state as well.
Yes.
Recognize your strengths and what you believe in yourself, because you just walk taller, you feel stronger, you feel better when you're in that state. And we will move, from time to time into a low personal power. It's a kind of confidence. What builds your confidence? I pinch this from the human element, this idea of what we call the 1% rule. Just imagine that you, and I say this to people when I'm coaching them, they say, oh, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm stuck in my situation. It's not my fault. Well, just imagine you, rather than saying, let's go to the 100% level, which I described earlier, let's just try out 1%. Oh, like 1%. Yeah, even I will accept that I've got 1%. Well, what is that one? Describe it to me. And lo and behold, they start telling you what they could do about the situation. You just got to open that door of possibility, because I think the emotional brain is quite categorical. Things are either possible or impossible, right or wrong, good or bad. Once you open that possible instead of impossible, people start asking questions and looking at different ways of change.
That's a great, I love the 1% rule. I snuck that from the human element as well. And the other thing I cunningly do on occasion is when someone says, oh, I'm not sure, I don't know, I'm not quite sure, and I then say, well, what if you were sure? What if you did know? And they say, yeah, but I don't know. But it's like, yeah, but what if you did know? What would you... and it's a sneaky way.
You can't get that out of your head once you put it in there. Oh, well, yeah.
Well, maybe I do
game
know.
with children. What?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, well, maybe I do know the answer. Or another great question is, well, what would a great friend say?
Yeah.
Or what would so and so leader say about this particular situation?
Yeah. Again, it's sort of opening up a sense of more choice in your life. If you have the language of choice, can, will, may, can do, rather than can't, never, must, have to. They are words that indicate you're locked into your emotional brain, because the emotional brain sees things in either, as I said, categorical. And when you're locked into a negative emotional trance, then things are absolute. And you listen to people's language. I have to do this. I must do that. It doesn't leave any opportunity for anything else if that's a fact. If it's a fact, and you've got to, using your questions, reframe that so they see that maybe even unconsciously they're accepting possibility all of a sudden. So this is personal power. I'm aware we need to move on, don't we, Jim, because of just number of scales, but they're all connected, of course. So
no, it's beautiful, and it also speaks to Carol Dweck's book Mindset, where she speaks about growth mindset and fixed mindset. And again, it goes back to, so you were talking about language, and language is, of course, that's our thing as coaches, picking up on the language patterns. So hearing what people are saying and getting them to, take a different use of words and see the power that can have on changing the situation. So if I hear difficult, if I hear a leader say, oh, it's really difficult. Well, yeah, it may well be difficult, but a better word would be it's different. The environment's different at the moment instead of difficult. So difficult reinforces, oh, it's really tough, and we're probably not going to be able to get through this.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Some of this stuff is quite theoretical, but it's fundamental. I find once people buy into the idea of it, then they go and do something about it. But sometimes people love the ideas, but they don't actually take action. And certainly when we get to goal directedness, it's very much about doing it. So if you want to build personal power, one way is, learn about it, realize it, accept the levels of choice, but then it's not going to be embodied. You're not going to do it unless you experience it. So go out and try it. Set yourself a bit more of a challenge. Take a bit more responsibility, just incrementally. Try moving outside your comfort zone a bit more than you normally do, and see how it goes. See it as an experiment. Give yourself L plates, I often say, so it's okay to make mistakes. All right. So you're just trialing things out. Extend your level of personal power just a little bit by doing something with that demonstrates it.
I love that as well. The L plates thing, I'm learning some new stuff here. So give yourself a break and just say, I've got my L plates on at the moment. I'm giving this a whirl. I'm giving it a trial.
And it goes back to the original metaphor of emotional intelligence, Jim, of learning of driving a car. Yeah, and it's all developable, but you've got to navigate the traffic. And obviously at the beginning, we've got L plates on, so we're practicing.
I like that. And the thing that really spikes my excitement around this conversation is the big word that you continue to use is choice. So many people don't believe they have a choice. So whenever I talk about personal responsibility, I go deep into that. If I'm speaking at a conference, I talk about personal responsibility a lot. And on occasion, I've had people come up to me and at the end of at a conference and say, "Yeah, but you don't know my life." Sort of like, well, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they still had choices to make. Some of them. So sometimes the choices are a bad choice and a bad choice, but they're still choice.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always stay the same all the time. It always changes. The situation always changes. So, take a moment, take a breath, and it will change. Something will come along and change the whole perspective.
Yeah. And sometimes it's, putting it upon someone by saying, yes, you've got more choice than you think, and actually it's down to you. And say, well, you'd say, you're telling me off, I'm not good enough, it's all my fault. No. Sometimes a softer approach of, try this out. It doesn't always work, but it might work. At least you won't know until you have a go. So just assume for a moment you chose this situation. Just, put everything else to one side just for a minute and try this little experiment. Why would that have happened? Well, I didn't. It's not my fault. No. But I'm just saying we're going to try this out. So do it as a little game or experiment, and then get them talking about, well, if that was the case, then blah, blah. So it's just, again, opening up more options for that individual.
And that's what coaching obviously does, is you're laying options at the doorstep for them to choose. Okay, so which out of these ones, which one would you prefer to have a go at? Which one would you like to have a chance to look at?
So personal power is a massive, superpower. It is a massive one for life. And I say it's almost the other side to self-regard is personal power. One's belief that you can do things. The other one is self-acceptance. They are different, but hand in hand, they're supercharging you to, great success without arrogance, of course. It doesn't mean it's acceptance of, hands up, I made a mistake, I'm responsible, I didn't do that as I'd like. I'm not going to beat myself up because my self-regard is good enough that I'm not going to tell I'm a worthless person, but I am going to accept the feedback that I could improve.
Yes.
So that's self-regard with personal power.
Yeah. Which leads us nicely into goal-directedness, because with great emotional resilience and high personal power, or even if those two scales are low, the thing that you do need some semblance of is a sense of goal-directedness. And I know that, for you, Joe, with all the things you've accomplished in your career and also outside of your career as an athlete, doing Ironman triathlon, qualifying for GB, then going off and doing, race across America as a part of the 4-man team at very short notice. That was my fault.
I chose it, but
I know. I'm only joking.
I chose to meet you, and
exactly, which was fantastic. You flying into America and being part of the 4-man team at very short notice was pretty spectacular. But then you went on to do other things as well. So you went off and did the Marathon des Sables, and then you walked all the way to South Pole. I almost walked there with you, but just couldn't.
North Pole.
North, sorry. So North, one of the poles. I had a 50-50 chance, Joe.
I did invite you.
Yeah, no, I know. I also, but just couldn't get the cash together to come and join you.
Of course,
But what an experience, and that would have tapped into your emotional resilience and your personal power. But more importantly, you became extremely goal-directed. And I think you probably were goal-directed before all that came about, the athletic stuff, because of course you were very goal-directed in your business and your career as a psychologist.
It's interesting you describe it as that, because I remember doing something called a 16 PF when I was at school, at university, and I scored low on factor G, which is sort of kind of driven, conscientious, doing and that's sort of considered goal-directedness. And yet when I do the emotional intelligence goal-directed, I get a very different score. I'm pretty high on it. And I think that's because we see it in different ways. For the emotional intelligence is aligning your behavior to your long-term goals.
Yes.
And that's kind of what I do. But am I a planner? Am I an organizer? Am I have somebody really structured, this is what I'm going to do? Not really,
no,
but I do know what I want.
Yes.
And I think I said it before, do you know what you want? Certainly at that time of life, I did. I was very single-minded to do these various things. And that drove me to do those things. While other people are very structured and organized in their lives, and you say they're very goal-directed, always do what they say, So I think there's slightly different things. Now, as I say, what you want might be just to switch off and relax, or be lazy, or be very casual, whatever it is, to be a loafer. And why not? If that's what you want, as long as you know that's what you're choosing, to be aware of what you want. A want is a need. You need to be self-aware, in touch with your feelings. So
Yes.
yeah, it's a bit of a surprise in hindsight later on in life. I thought, yes, maybe I am very goal-directedness, but not in the way that people often see it. Yeah, so that's an important part of it. Aligning your behaviour to long-term goals. I think there's another part, which is not being distracted from what you want.
Yes.
What we call impulse control. And gosh, you know what it's like training to do race across America and whatever. It's a year, maybe 2 years of pretty solid training, going out in the early hours of the morning, not eating the food you might want to eat. And it's very easy to fall off the wagon. But what holds you back is having this very clear vision of where you're going and what has to be done to achieve that, and sticking by it. So yeah, I think particularly in young people, this sort of impulsivity, going to what's immediately hedonistically enjoyable, rather than the deeper level needs, which give you longer term well-being, really.
Yeah.
Which is sense of success, sense of achievement, sense of good relationships, and so forth. To give you an example of that, I don't know if you know the marshmallow test. It's a classic experiment by Walter Mischel,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'll just describe it briefly. And it's a great illustration of what we're discussing here. So, the children were about 5 or 6 years old, and they were given a marshmallow and said, right, you can have that marshmallow, but I'm going to go out of the room and get you another marshmallow. But if you haven't eaten that one, I'll give you the second one. And they are videoing these children, and the children are literally holding their, just trying to lick the marshmallow, holding their hands back. And of course, some kids just couldn't help it and ate the damn thing. But they had the marshmallow. Anyway, they came back, and some kids didn't eat it, and they got a second one and said, I'm going out the room again. When I come back, I'm going to double it. I'm going to give you 2 more marshmallows, but you mustn't eat those 2. And they came back, and same thing happened, and it carried on and carried on. And some kids ended up with loads of marshmallows because they had impulse control, I suppose. What the experimenter called deferred gratification.
Yeah.
Now, the important thing is not just in that moment impulse control, but they followed the children up into adult life and see how they got on. And no surprise, the children who had more impulse control tended to do better in life. And they accounted for the socioeconomic differences and so forth. And I said, basically, a lot of what we do in life is about deferring reward. So a lot of youngsters don't particularly want to study for years at university, or train hard in order to get later qualifications, or save money because it's this sort of holding back. And as we get older, we learn that's useful to us. But if you don't learn that, certainly in the Western society, you're probably going to struggle more. So this simple attitude of impulse control, goal-directedness, is very fundamental, certainly in the Western world, to success, or at least as we define success. But at the same time, you need to combine that with knowing what you want. Because if you're just doing it because it's keeping your parents happy, or doing what society expects of you, then you may not end up doing the thing you really wanted anyway. There are 2 parts to goal-directedness, and both need to be combined.
Really, really, really powerful. And that's a beautiful example, the marshmallow test. And I'll see if I can get a link to that for the people that are viewing this on video. So I'll put in the YouTube, because there will be a YouTube. I'm pretty sure there's a YouTube. I've seen it myself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for sure there is. What I've never really sort of asked you though, Joe, is what was your compelling why you got into some of that extreme stuff? We've never really sort of discussed that, and I'm just curious that as we talk around goal-directedness, what was it that drove you? What was your reason for doing Ironman, triathlon, race across America, the Marathon des Sables, the North Pole expedition? What was that about? Because there's some big chunks of really tough, grueling physical stuff there that speaks to emotional resilience, that speaks to personal power, that and of course also speaks to goal-directedness. So
I don't know deep down psychologically. I could explain lots of things. One of the things is like competing with my brother. I was the youngest child, and I think I was also striving to keep up, as you do when you're younger. So maybe that's one of the underlying things about being a striver. You've got to work harder to get where you want to go. And unconsciously, I think I did that. And I think my family upbringing was very much, get on with it.
Yeah. Okay. Stiff upper
And
lip sort of approach.
I'm from that background. Yeah, just get on with it and stop complaining. And there's
Brilliant.
good sides and bad sides to that, but there's certainly the good side. And I know one of the things I often say when I talk about motivation from my experiences, motivation comes from taking action. It doesn't come from some sort of eureka experience. I'm waiting to be inspired before I can write my next book. I'm waiting to feel the energy before I go out for a run. You'll be waiting a long time. It might happen, but you'll probably be waiting. I'll tell you what will work though. If you start writing, you might start getting inspired.
Yes.
If you start walking, you might feel like running. And energy comes from doing more often than not. So I often say the first step, and I was quite good at that first step of going out and doing. I get bored easily, and I'm quite a physical person. And I mean, more than anything else, I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed the excitement, the possibility. I mean, there was an incident in my life where I was doing an off ski touring, ski mountaineering, and I fell off the mountain. I had some pretty nasty accidents, and it took me a year to get through various. But I was 40 years old.
Was that when you broke your ankle? You broke your ankle.
Broke my ankle, shoulder, various bits of my body, and it did take a long time to get through that. And I do remember thinking, gosh, I need to do stuff, because I might not be able to do it later. And every year I said, I'm going to do one thing in my life I feel is an achievement. And I like physical stuff. So I focused on the physical, and I did that every year. I was good at triathlon, so I did that, but I ended up doing a running event. I did lots of swimming distance events and cycling events with you, Jim, and one or two other things. And I became it became a bit habitual. I won't say obsessed, but maybe you do need to be a bit obsessed to go to that extreme. And the more I did, the more I wanted to do. So I suppose what the point for me is, what drove me was actually doing it made me realize I enjoy this and I can go further. I often think as a human being, you've got capacities and resources, and what improves well-being and health and everything as a human is using those resources. When I take my dog for a walk, it's super fit dog. It's only 2.5, and I take him could take him to the park with a lead, and he would sniff around and use his sniffing sense. But what I like is taking him to I get in the car and I go to lovely outdoor fields and open countryside, and he is running for an hour constantly, sprinting. And I think, that is what the dog is built for. And that dog is happy as anything when he's doing what he likes doing. And it worked for me too. I'm not a dog, but when I was using my innate capability, things I was good at and I liked, I felt that made me feel good. And I'd say that for anybody, find out what you're good at, whether it's writing, dancing, singing, talking to friends, doesn't matter what it is. If you, and I've got a son who's 20 and he's at that age, what gets you going? You may not enjoy it all the time, but when you do more of it, you feel happy about yourself. And find that thing. And I suppose and I found my thing, and it certainly helped me over. So I did that for 10 years pretty much until COVID struck, and then I think we were all held back a bit.
Yeah, we were. Okay, well, thanks for sharing that. And so goal directedness. So if someone scores low on goal directedness, these are individuals that I tend to, and you've already spoken about the distraction, the delayed gratification piece. So they get either distracted by their regard for others. So they are helping other people achieve their goals and they're not achieving their own. So that's a potential distraction. And they just get distracted because I call them lures. When people go fishing with a lure instead of bait, the lure is the shiny thing. They get distracted by something shiny, something else is interesting that's come up. And it could be actually the latest the Gen Z people, that they are distracted easily by Facebook or whatever it is that they're looking at, or a TikTok or whatever it could be. But what are those distractions? So what are the things that are interrupting them from achieving their goals? So being aware of that, so what are the things that are preventing them from doing the doing? Like you say, it's taking action. So what is it that's stopping them from taking action to
I think one of the things is wanting to please others, and it's a wonderful thing. But
Yes.
I notice some people, you say, oh, could you do this, and they'll drop everything they're doing, even if it's a very important task, to suddenly keep everyone happy. And it gets reinforced because they do that. People think, oh, they're the go-to person, I'll always ask them. I
Yes.
had one or two colleagues like that, really nice people, and dare I say it, that it tends to be females who just give themselves up for other people and don't say, what is it I want? You can do both, but just say, actually, not right now. There's other things I've got to do. Then I'll come on to it. Or and the danger is when it comes to authenticity, and you talked about people get low scores on that scale, is if you try too hard to please others, you may end up displeasing them because you commit to things you can't deliver. So you
Yes.
say yes all the time, and actually you let people down. So it's not that you're inauthentic and you're manipulative or lying or anything nasty. In fact, you're too nice. Yeah, you're trying to keep everyone happy, but because you're overburdened, you end up exhausted, not achieving, not delivering what they ask for, and they think you're unreliable.
Yeah.
So a reliable person is somebody who knows what they want and has a reasonable degree of assertiveness to say, actually, not right now. So that's an important element of goal-directedness.
Yeah. Or maybe you're not, it might not be not right now, or it might be not right now, but I will come to it, so
Absolutely.
happy to support and help.
Yeah.
But there's a
Or
whole lot of,
maybe, this isn't for me. And actually, I feel like I'm doing my fair share.
mm-hmm.
And right now is what I've got to work on is my stuff, if that's okay with you. And you mentioned about, the other impulse control. And I think if you look at people say, oh, I've got this, I want to do this, that, and the other. And you tend to find that they're often not very important things, or they're fun things. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have fun and watching telly, playing on games, going out with your mates. But if you spend your entire time doing that and say, I haven't got time, yeah, well, I think you do. You're just choosing to spend it differently. Yeah.
Yes.
How much time do you spend watching telly or playing games or doing things that are just relaxing or switch off or nothing to do with the objective you set? And how much time do you spend doing the things that are your objective? And you'd be surprised how much time is spent doing the non-objectives. But just be aware that's a choice. It may be unconscious that you've chosen to spend 90% of your time watching telly or reading a book, whatever. And if that's not your objective, maybe you could change it from 10% on your objective to 15. All right.
Yeah.
Don't give up all that stuff, just a little bit more.
Yeah, it's interesting with the goal stuff. One of the things, some people have a list of, a to-do list. What I recommend people to do is start their day with the most difficult task. So get that done. That you've just spoke about it. We get distracted with filling our time with insignificant little goals that we might be achieving, that might be helping serve other people's needs, not ours. And that goal that we need to lean into, we're not leaning into. So lean into that first, knock that one off your list, your to-do list, because it's not going to then show up on your to-do list tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So making sure that you lean into it and sort of chunk it down. So and NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, talks about chunking up and chunking down. So the goal is, the bit that you want, this big thing that you want to achieve, then break it down into smaller component parts that help you say, okay, so what's the first step that I need to take? Well, the first step is I need to go out and get some new kit if I'm going to go walking to the North Pole. So what is it I need? I need some pretty good gloves. I need to research. And before you even do all that, you would have researched it all quite heavily. So you would have got into a lot of research on the internet.
This is, you asked about my own situation, and all the events I did, I'd actually go on the internet and read about it for ages. And
yeah.
I felt inside me a massive amount of excitement. You need that level of excitement and energy if you're going to do it. If it's like, oh God, I want to do a PhD, I really want it, but I don't really want to read 600 papers or spend 4 years. Maybe you're not ready. It's not ready for you right now. But if you get totally excited, like I did about the things I did achieve, then maybe, you're gonna keep doing it. But you got to check that excitement. Don't just read about it one day or talk to a mate in a pub and say, I'm going to go do it. Check it out for a few weeks is my advice, maybe even months. Read about it, get really into the nitty-gritty, the downside of it, the hard part, the expensive bit, actually. And then if you still got that excitement, go for it. And you must have found that because you did it. You did the race across America. I'll just make sure everyone else knows this, 3,000 miles on your own over something like 10 days, which is basically, I don't know, 20 hours on your bike every day for 10 days. And you didn't just do it once. I think you've done it more than any other person, not just in the UK, but perhaps more than most people in the world. Is that true, Jim? I mean,
So I've done it 3 times as a solo, once as a 4-person team, but the 3 times as a solo was consecutive. So it was, year on year and going faster each time. And yeah, I'm one of very few people that have done it. Well, I'm the only one in the UK, for example, that has done it 3 consecutive years running and gone faster each year. There are other athletes that have gone back time and time and time and time again, A, because they've got great sponsorship, and probably B, most importantly, they're just completely addicted to it.
I mean, our motivations are different, really. Even though you might say, oh, we both love doing endurance, I would love to do something once and feel like I've done it. Get me to do the North Pole again or swim 20 miles again or something like that. No, I've done it. I want to move on to something different. While you still get that tingling in your stomach, and I think you eventually had to stop. You're pulled back by everybody else rather than you wanted to stop doing a 4th time, and you had to earn a living, I think.
Exactly, earning a living, and the relationship situation took a bit of a dive as well. So when you're so focused, goal directed is great, and it does help you achieve goals. When you're so obsessed and so goal directed, like I was in particular, I think that I became obsessed with it. But my why, my purpose was very different compared to a lot of other athletes. I wanted to put myself up there as a normal human being, and a lot of people wouldn't say I'm normal. I still believe I am a normal human being with a family, a job, etc. Not that I was focusing a great deal on the job, but I was training, and I was attempting to juggle all those things. And I was wanting to be an example of, a normal human being and what was possible. So I was trying to stretch people's imagination around what was physically possible to do, even though I wasn't an Olympic cyclist, etc., as you know, Joe. So my why was very different. I wanted to create the awareness for other people that we all have greatness inside us, not greatness to go out and do physical things necessarily, but to achieve anything that we set our mind to. And that was my purpose, and still continues, as you know, is my main purpose still as a coach, to talk about what is possible, what is doable. And actually, goal directedness is a great tool to help people. When someone's low on goal directedness, as a coach, I use the handprint model. And I know I've spoken to you about the handprint model before. And the handprint model is basically, you write the goal in the palm of your hand. You take a A4 piece of paper, trace around your hand, and in the middle of your palm, you write the goal down. And then you ask the question, okay, so that's the main goal that you want to achieve. What are the 5 things you need to do that are critical to helping you achieve that goal? So they write those 5 things down, and then you put a stake in the ground and say, okay, so where are you? 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, 100%. Where are you on each of those finger points towards achieving that particular point that is critical to achieving the main goal? So they then calibrate it, and then they get a good representation of where they are right now with all of those 5 things that are critical to achieving that goal. And then you can ask the next question, which is, okay, so what are the 5 things you need to do to get this point to 100%? And what are the 5 things you need to do so that's a separate handprint. So that then becomes the goal. So that's chunking it down. So you've got the main goal, and then you chunk it right down into bite-sized pieces. And you can timeline those aspects as well. You can say, okay, I want to have achieved this particular point by next month, or this particular point by the end of the year, etc.
I think I really like it, Jim, not because it's just chunking down, but you're going to be taking this with you for the rest of your life.
Yes.
You can change them, but these digits, it's like somebody will get you to write it down and put it in your top pocket, but it's so powerful, isn't it, to have something kinesthetic like that?
Yeah.
And as little children, you say, this little thing went to market, it's something you've always had throughout your life. That's brilliant for goal directedness as a technique. Yeah.
And I use that as a, if I'm working with a leadership team, I use that on a flip chart and just say,
Mm,
okay,
mm,
so
mm,
I haven't got any agenda here, but let's do a handprint. What's the goal
mm,
that you want to achieve? And then
mm,
in a team environment, every individual in the team gets to contribute to the thinking of how they achieve that goal.
I can think
And
about somebody who's trying to go from couch to 5K, isn't that one of the things? And you could be
yes,
running your 5K, and this is your 5K, and you're running along and with your goals. So that's K1 done,
mm-hmm.
K2, and I can see it being really tangible way of embodily making these goals happen. Mm,
Yeah, no, it is really powerful, and it's, as you say, it's kinesthetic, but it's also visual.
mm,
So I quite like the visual aspect of tracing around your hand and then doing it one on one with somebody, and
mm,
that's really really powerful
mm.
when working with goal directedness. Is
I just connected to that is in terms of developing goal directness. I say visualization is a very powerful way of that, and we've talked about
yes,
athletes sort of not just visualizing the end point. I think we mentioned it in the previous one, but it actually fires off the same neurons as if you're doing it by visualizing in your head. And the more real you can make that, the more likely your brain is preparing yourself for doing that. It's an expectation. Equally, if you visualize bad things or not achieving things or things going wrong, unconsciously you'll be orientated towards that. So it's learning to use that innate capacity of imagination to help you to achieve your goals.
you've triggered a funny imagination and a visualization in my head about your walk to the North Pole, because I know you had to watch out for polar bears because that's a
Mm, mm,
genuine risk, and
mm.
you wouldn't have wanted to be visualizing that at all. You wouldn't have been
No, no.
visualizing being eaten by a polar bear, but
Well, I wouldn't want to visualize it, but I suppose there's another aspect to that is I was kind of, it'll be okay, don't worry about it, and head down, which you should be more vigilant. And of course, the danger is you're not expect if you do kind of need to expect the worst, because otherwise you're not prepared to. There's various ways you can prepare, and one of the groups, there's 5 different groups doing this race, and there's 400 miles, and they did get, I say attacked, but they managed to. Now, just to be clear, you're given a shotgun. You don't shoot the animal. All right, you
sure.
use it to shoot the snow in front. Even if you were to hit an animal, it wouldn't kill them. So the worst thing you could do is that you use it to scare the animal, and so that was done. You do it in front of them. They used it and they scared the animals off, but they came back. But this is just because you've mentioned it, the aspect of preparation, and so it was a very real threat in what was called Polar Bear Pass.
Yeah, I think I'd take a pass on that. That's probably one of the reasons I didn't want to come, Joe. It was too cold and couldn't get the money together. But what an achievement! And there's still another book in you for sure. You need to write about the fire and ice experience that you experienced in the Marathon des Sables, and the marathons in across the desert, but also the North Pole as well. That
It's interesting, Jim, because I mean the North Pole is the exciting one that I tell people about because they want to see the pictures and stuff, and it's probably something that nobody else does, and it was a one-off for me too. But the hardest thing, apart from I did the group, we did Lands and John O'Groats, so that was pretty a lot of cycling and running. The hardest thing I did was the swimming actually, and it's probably the most boring one to talk about.
yeah, wow.
Uh, Swimming, endurance, long distance swimming, you're basically doing exactly the same thing in exactly the same environment for 12 hours or so. And although it's not that exciting, it's certainly it's certainly the most demanding I found to get through.
That's interesting.
It's almost like you're in a trance. Running's a trance, but you get different environments. Your feet are lining different terrain and stuff. But with water, it's exactly the same, and you're maintaining a very constant pace. But it's a mental game with swimming.
Yeah,
Very, very strong mental game.
that speaks to your board aspect component
Mm,
comes flooding into my head. It's
mm,
thinking,
mm,
yeah, Joe was probably bored after the last couple of miles,
mm.
within the first couple of miles, because it's then
Oh,
the same.
well, the training is, you could be doing 6 hours a day just swimming, but the boredom you get beyond it, it's like you get very, very bored. But then after an hour, after half an hour, your mind just starts wandering, and you're in
Yeah,
a different world. And you think, God, another hour's gone by. It's like driving on the motorway for hours. You don't realize the time just flies by.
yeah, it's
But
crazy.
it's a very calming thing to do.
I know you were keen to talk about other aspects of the self-management scale, but I do believe that we've probably done
Mm,
about an hour and a
mm,
half now, Joe, on this episode.
mm,
I think it would be useful to come back again, just
mm,
maybe touch on these elements of emotional resilience, personal power, and goal directedness,
mm,
and come and finish off the self-management scales if that's okay with you. I mean, I've been
yeah.
again completely, excited about our conversation today. And again, thank you for putting aside the time for us to be able to have this conversation, because I think people will get some tips and some clues about themselves, how to handle themselves more
Mm,
effectively in their personal relationships, their
mm.
professional relationships.
Yeah, good. I hope so. And I think all of these, the ones we've talked about this morning, emotional resilience, personal power, they're the most related to leadership and effectiveness. They're the performance scales. They're
Yes.
the hardiness driving, and they need to be balanced, of course, with other aspects. But if you want to achieve something, it's going to be tough unless you've got those scales. I would also say that they also relate very strongly to happiness. If you know what you want, which is halfway, knowing what you want in life, which is goal directedness, working that out, and then making it happen, which is largely personal power, then those two components are really essential to, well-being. Knowing what you want, making it happen. If you get those two scales, but a lot of other factors may filter in to make that achievable.
Okay. Well, look, thank you again, Joe. And I look forward to our next session, our next episode on the podcast. And have a great rest of this week.
Thank you,
So,
Jim.
well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Thank you for listening. Remember to share and subscribe to the EI Guru podcast. And if you have any questions, you can post them once you've subscribed. You can follow me on Instagram at the EI Guru. And you can get more information from my website, theeiguru.com. Have a fantastic week. Bye for now.